Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're talking about our Kickoff to College series, what rising 11th and 12th graders should do to rise above the competition. I'm your host, Ann Dolin, and for the last 24 years, my tutors, coaches, and college counselors have been helping kids to do better in school and to get into the schools of their dreams when it comes to college. So tonight, we're specifically talking about rising juniors and seniors. So before I introduce Kristin, I'm curious, I'd love to pop up a poll right now. Let me know, is your child a rising junior, a rising senior, or another grade? If you could go ahead and put that in the poll right now, that would be terrific. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Interesting. Great. So it looks like we've got about 49% rising seniors, followed by 42% of parents of rising juniors, and about 10% of others, probably freshmen or sophomores. And I'm glad that you're here too, because it's always good to know what's going to happen in the future. Well, we've got something for everybody this evening. And first, I want to start by introducing Kristin Landis. Kristin has a fabulous background to speak to you tonight. Kristin is a former UVA admissions officer. She worked at UVA for over a decade evaluating students' applications. In fact, she evaluated over 10,000 applications, both in-state, out-of-state, and international candidates. She's a college consultant with us now at Educational Connections. She has her Bachelor of Science from the University of Richmond. She has a law degree from Emory University School of Law. Kristin, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here this evening.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Ann.
So now it's go time for seniors. Tell us a little bit about where seniors should be in the process. We'll talk about juniors, and then we'll talk about both of them as we go along this evening.
Sure, absolutely. So we're about at the end of the first week in August. Hopefully, rising seniors and juniors have had a very nice, relaxing, fun summer. Maybe they've partaken in some enrichment opportunities as well, but we're all starting to see those back to school advertisements out, and back to school also means back to thinking about colleges. If you're a rising senior, this is the time to get focused. You have a couple weeks before school starts. It's a perfect time to sit down. It's not too late, and come up with a plan. In a few weeks, you'll be starting with school and classes and coursework and activities. So this is a time to really lay out a plan. Life doesn't stop just because you're applying to colleges, and it may seem daunting, but to help alleviate some of that stress, this time right now will allow students, if they get their plan together, to concentrate on their schoolwork. Remember, first semester grades senior year are still extremely important when you're applying to college. So now's the time to start.
Awesome. And I know we're going to talk about seniors throughout the presentation tonight. And then we have juniors. So juniors are really just starting the process. Mm-hmm. Where should they be at this point, Kristin?
Sure. I mean, juniors are positioned very well right now. They have the luxury of time. This is a perfect time to start thinking about college and thinking about positioning yourself in the best light. The junior year, and I know everybody already knows this, everybody always says it's such an important year. I mean, it is an important year. It's an important year in the classroom and also out of the classroom. It's an important time to make an impact. It's an important time to think strategically about your year. And to think thoughtfully about how you want to structure your year and your summer, next summer. Summers are also very important. So they're just taking this time to set themselves up for when they are ready for next year when they apply to schools.
Kristin, it was funny when we were just chit-chatting before the presentation started this evening, and you said something that really resonated with me about the kids that you see.
Yes.
They come to you at all different ages, starting in 8th grade and 9th grade up until seniors that are just desperate to get everything done.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about, how kids manage the process and what you see in your students?
Sure. I mean, it is, let's put a fine point on it. It can be a very stressful process for people. And so that's one of the reasons we're here to kind of hold your hand through the process. I have students that come to me where both they and their parents look like deer in headlights. I also have students that come to me that come with their Excel spreadsheets and scattergrams and acceptance rate percentages, and they're ready to go. So it really runs the gamut. But this is truly the student's process. And it's really important to listen to your student, to talk to them openly and have an open line of communication with your student, because this is their process. And it can be a really nice experience for both you and your student as you go through it. So I think the most important thing is to just think about a plan, get started, and just know that it'll all be okay in the long run, really.
Always is. Yes, that's
Yeah.
for sure. One of the things that we think about when we're helping kids to really position themselves as a unique individual is to craft a narrative.
Mhm.
Why is crafting a narrative more important than it was? Maybe not so much 5 or 10 years ago, but why is that narrative so important now?
Yes, I mean, you hear a lot about if you've worked with counselors or worked with EC tutoring, we use the language craft a narrative all the time. So what exactly, let's talk about first what exactly that means. What that means is for a student, what it is about that student, what's important to them? What are they passionate about? What makes them tick? What unique voice do they have? And what sets them apart from the person sitting next to them? And the reason that's so important nowadays, and then in the past, is there are just that many more people applying to colleges. This past year in 2021, the College app released a statistic that applications are up, well over 20%. So it's really more important than ever to differentiate yourself from the person sitting next to you.
Can you give an example of a couple of students maybe, or just one student that crafted their narrative?
Sure. So again, talking about, what's important to the student. And I don't want people to get stressed out. I mean, even when you're an adult, sometimes you don't know what you're passionate about or, what your interests lie, but everybody has something that what makes them the most happy. What do they enjoy doing? And it's finding those out from students and helping elevate that and think strategically throughout the process. Like, let's say hypothetically, your student really loves animals. They're really important to them. They think they may want a career in working with animals in the future. So you start looking for outside opportunities to take a class, maybe in pre-vet. A lot of colleges offer pre-vet classes. Or you go and you volunteer at your local animal shelter or get an internship at a vet clinic. That's kind of setting a theme or a narrative. Something else, let's take someone who may be interested in graphic design. So a lot of schools have CAD classes that you can sign up for. So one of your electives is a CAD class. And then maybe you work on a project in your home, helping your parents design turning the shed into a studio or something, or you get an internship or a volunteer with an architectural firm. Those are crafting a narrative, setting a theme with regards to things that your child is interested in.
Thank you for that, Kristin. So certainly having that, defining a narrative is important, but sometimes parents will say, I don't know what my child is good at, or they don't seem to really have a passion. They don't know what they want to major in. How do you tease that out with kids? What are some questions that you ask? Or
Sure.
I know you also use a survey with students. How do you get that information?
So, I mean, there's assessments. We also have some of them here that students can take to try to think about what they're interested in, where their talents lie. Everybody's interested in something. You could be interested in music, or maybe there's a specific television show that you like or something, and that takes you in a different direction. Everyone's passionate about something. It's just tweezing that out of children. So I usually sit down with kids and I ask this question, and sometimes I get blank stares, and then we delve a little more into it. Like, what brings you joy? What makes you happy in your life? If you had an extra hour and you didn't know what to do with yourself, what would you choose to do? And those are how you kind of just dig deeper, because every student has something.
That is so true. Thank you for that, Kristin. So in addition, we know that course selection is really important. Tell us a little bit about course selection and what it takes these days to get into a really competitive college versus, maybe a midline college.
Sure. Well, first of all, let's just start for seniors. I don't want them to think it's too late. There is still time before the school year starts. You can check your program, see if your course selection kind of falls in line with your narrative, just like we talked about. If you're interested in a specific area, let's say you are really interested in business, you think you may want to go into business, see if there's an entrepreneurial elective that you can take, or a marketing class. And there's still time to meet with your guidance counselor, change up your electives. If you are, the quite obvious one is if you're a STEM kid, if you're really interested in going into engineering, looking to see that you're taking those really high level math classes. Definitely you want to have physics. For juniors, it's a little easier in that they have 2 years to set up their plan. So this is a great time to literally map out your junior and your senior year coursework and make sure that your courses are in line with what you're interested in.
Do you often find that kids haven't picked the right classes for them?
Yes.
Kristin, for themselves?
Mhm.
What are some common errors that you see?
So I think some common errors, specifically with regards to if a child wants to apply to an engineering school, an engineering program, let's say they've taken pre-calculus and then they've decided to take AP stats instead of AP calculus or AP AB or BC calculus. I think it's really important if you're applying to engineering school that you need to get through calculus. You also need to take physics. I think if you're, let's say you're a liberal arts kid and you're really interested in history, taking that highest level government class or US history, those are really important, showing that your interest is in line with the courses that you've picked.
I also get the question about languages. You know, generally schools want to see 4 years of a language. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, the graduation requirements for most high schools are usually 2 or 3 years of a language. If you are applying to the considered highly selective schools, they like to see 4 years of a language. If you can get to AP in a language, that's even better. So I think if you do 2 and 2, that's fine too. If you have the continuity of one language all the way through, that's, even compelling as well. So really important, even though not just to meet your graduation requirements for your high school, but to take that on even higher if you're applying to those more highly competitive schools.
Kristin, thanks for that. Let's switch gears and talk about testing, the SAT and ACT, especially in a test optional environment. Tell us a little bit about the timing behind testing and whether these days it's even important anymore.
Sure. So because of the pandemic, we are still in that kind of test optional environment. In fact, we've seen like with the California schools, UC California schools have done away with testing altogether, but there may be a time when schools go back to testing. We're kind of in that in-between phase right now. We don't really know where testing is going to go. I think for seniors, if it's still not too late to test, if you're applying early action to a school, you can still take an October test. If you're applying regular decision, you can take a December test. So there's still time. I think if you're a good test taker, depending on the school you're applying to, your score may enhance and add to your application. If your testing score falls in the higher percentages of those students that are accepted, then I would submit my scores. If they don't, then I wouldn't submit my scores. And then for juniors, they have a little bit more luxury of time. I think these last few weeks before you start school is an excellent time to take a practice test of an SAT or an ACT and an SAT, see which test you like better, which format you like better, and then come in the next few, I would say by January, think about signing up for a prep class in that specific test, and then with the goal of taking a spring test.
Kristin, you mentioned picking a test and sticking with it. When you were evaluating applications, did you have a preference?
Absolutely not. It doesn't matter whether you take the SAT or the ACT. It's really interesting. It's even sometimes even culturally specific. Years ago, I used to see the Midwest always took the ACT and the East Coast always took the SAT. Now it's a little more mixed, but no, they're equally the same, looked at the same.
And if testing might be something you want to consider for your child, as Kristin mentioned, having your child sit for one of each to determine where their strength is really helpful. And they don't have to be the actual test. It can be a mock test, and a mock test is a retired test. It's a test that's been used recently but isn't used anymore. So it's the same as the current testing versions. And we offer these most weekends. Kids can roll out of bed. They take them virtually with a live proctor, and you can just sign up online. So here's a QR code. If this would be helpful to your child, you can see all the upcoming dates in later this month in September, October, and November. And what we'll do is if your child takes one of each, or if they take the ACT and they also have a PSAT, we can look at both scores and make a determination in terms of which test your student is scoring best on. For about 30% of kids, it's clear, like they're definitely a better SAT test taker than ACT or vice versa. But for about 2/3 of kids, it's kind of a toss-up. So it's really personal preference at that point. And as Kristin said, prepping for that test, that's your best test, and sticking with it and submitting that score can really help your application. Now, you might not want to submit that score to a school that's in your reach list, because maybe, as Kristin said, that's not in the top of the range, but it could be an awesome way to separate yourself for a target or a safety school, because it makes you look like a stronger student. Kristin, how do you help kids determine when to, how to balance their list and when to submit those scores?
Exactly how you said, Ann. It's one of the things where when we research your lists, I mean, obviously testing is just a component. There's a lot more involved to your application. Program and grades are truly the most important thing. So exactly how you said, we look at the schools that are on your list. If your testing falls within those higher percentages for that specific school, we'll submit. If it falls, not in that, we won't submit. But as you said, for your safeties or your targets, if they are in that range, we will submit. The same goes for AP scores. I don't think a lot of people realize that you don't have to submit all your AP scores or any. So I would recommend that if a student doesn't have 4s and 5s for their reaches schools, they don't submit the scores. If it's more for their safeties or lower target schools, they may want to submit a 3. It just depends. And that's something that we can help students make a determination on.
Thank you, Kristin. That's really helpful about AP scores. All right. So if your head is spinning right now and you feel like you might want a little bit of help with all of this, Erin Ebert is your girl. She's our college counseling program director, and she can help you sort through everything that's going on with your child, whether he or she is a rising junior, senior, or younger. And you can just schedule a call with her to talk about your situation, to see if we can help, whether you want to work with Kristin or one of our other college counselors. And you can just scan this QR code. It will take you to Erin's calendar, and you can set up a time to talk to her. All right, Kristin, let's switch real quick to recommendations. Tell us a little bit about the role of recommendations, the teacher recommendations versus counselor recommendations, and what kids should do now, whether they're, well, I guess at this point, rising juniors or possibly rising seniors.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely things that both can do. So the recommendations fall into what I like to consider this human insight component of the application. It's another way to see what your student's narrative is, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, what sets them apart from the person sitting next to them. So for seniors, a lot of seniors have already asked for recommendations. It's more optimal to ask in the spring of your junior year, but if your student hasn't asked, don't worry, there's still plenty of time. This is a time for your student, your senior, to think about the teachers that they have a good relationship with, or maybe a teacher in a specific area of interest that they had. Let's say they're interested in, like I said, they're interested in business. Maybe they had a marketing teacher that they could ask. And then they can send them send them an email now asking for a recommendation. And then I also think it's very, very important to have one of those teachers be an 11th grade teacher. And then the other thing you want to do is you want to provide them with some additional information about yourself. Sure, they know how you were in the classroom. They know if you were a good learner or someone who participated well, but they don't know what you're doing outside the classroom, which is a huge part of your application. So I tell all my students, we submit either a resume or an activities list to a teacher. We also provide a little narrative talking about why that activity is important to them. It just gives it more to the teacher to make a more robust, more personalized, more detailed recommendation. And for juniors, this is great. You're set up. You're about to start your year. This is a time to think about establishing a relationship with some of your teachers. You want it to be organic. You don't want to be inauthentic, but it's important. Try to get to know your teachers so that when it comes next spring and it's time to ask, that there's a teacher that you can ask who might know you well. And then lastly, with regards to recommendations, I think it's really important to also think outside the box. Do you have, let's say you're in scouting, maybe a scouting leader is someone you can ask, or you have an internship and you could ask your mentor. I find that some of the most compelling recommendations that I've ever read have not been from teachers. They've been from a third party that student has had a relationship with outside of the classroom. And then an answer to your question, Ann, about guidance counselors. So all guidance counselors are supposed to submit a recommendation. Now it varies from school to school. Some schools have a lot of kids on their caseload. And so they may not submit a recommendation. They may just check some of the rankings and boxes on the Common App, or they may say, I'm not sending a recommendation, due to time. Never in my 11 years of evaluating students has that ever been penalized against a student. But sometimes guidance counselors know their students really, really well, and they send a recommendation that's quite detailed and personal, and that also can add to the add to the application, excuse me.
Makes sense, Kristin. Thank you for that. Brent, hello, Brent. I haven't seen your name in a while. It's great to see you here tonight. He says, I get the sense that students need multiple interests or passions when telling their narrative. Is one passion good enough, or should the student have several interests or passions?
That's a really great question. I rather see a student passionate about one thing than dabble in, the activities. The 10 activities are all listed on the Common App. I love to see 2 or 3, or even one's fine, thing that a student really is authentically interested in and has really gone kind of in depth in that area. I think that's very, very compelling.
Barb asked, how do extracurriculars play into the admissions decision? Is that part of the narrative? I would think so. Absolutely.
I mean, what you do outside of the classroom is very, very important. Obviously, as I said, program and grades is number one, top priority, but I want to know what the student is doing outside. When I reviewed applications, with every single student that I opened, I asked myself that question: what will this student bring to my college environment, both in and out of the classroom? What valuable contribution can they make? And can my school provide them with an environment for personal and academic growth? That's the question that I'm asking myself when I was deciding whether students would be admitted or not.
I ask, what if the school doesn't publicize ranks anymore? Like if you're a valedictorian?
A lot of schools, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
A lot of schools don't rank, and that's there's no penalization for that at all.
Thank you, Kristin. So, in talking about extracurriculars, it kind of gets us to our next slide, which is activities. What should a student highlight in their application?
I mean, as we've been talking about all evening, and I think it's just important to highlight their interests. How do they spend their time outside of school, whether it's in clubs at the school or outside activities? And don't forget hobbies. A lot of kids do things that are kind of non-traditional, and I love to see that kind of stuff. I mean, if you're a person who spends a tremendous amount of time, I don't know why I just thought of this, but of Legos. Let's say you're a master Lego builder, and that's how you spend your time. I mean, that's what I want to hear about. So it's really, it just adds to try to get an understanding of what that student is about. And nowadays, it's just amazing, as opposed to when we were younger, there are so many opportunities out there to explore different interests. I mean, let's say your student really doesn't know exactly what they want to do. there's got to be a couple things where you can just sit, look on the internet, find a class, find a volunteer opportunity, anything, try a bunch of different things. That's okay. That's what being young is all about.
For sure, Kristin. Thank you for that. So let's move on to compiling the college list. And we touched about this just a moment ago when we talked about, you want to have a balanced list and you want to make sure that you've kind of got a spattering of schools, maybe some schools that are your dream schools or the reach schools, some, schools that could go either way, they're right in the middle, and then schools that you're probably going to get accepted to. How do you help kids compile a college list? And what are some of the mistakes you see with kids that come to you for help through our program?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest questions that I get from students and parents is, what are my chances of getting into XYZ school? And when you get those questions, just like, people have to understand that college admissions is not an exact science. Nobody has a crystal ball and can tell you whether a student is going to get into a specific school or not. What we can do is exactly what you said, Ann. We can, first of all, present your student in the best possible light, really highlight the accomplishments they've done both in and out of the classroom. And then we can look at percentages in GPAs where students have gotten in and not gotten in at certain schools. But you have to understand that you can't live and die by those, because there are other factors that go into an acceptance. And those are things that we've been talking about all night. Also where your student goes to school, what state they're from, what area they're from, what's compelling about them outside of the classroom. Those are all factors that don't show up on those scattergrams on Naviance and Niche and College Vine. So I get concerned when people start really, that's all they're looking at, because there's a lot to it. So yes, we look at that, but as you said, Ann, we try to do a balance. We have a couple reaches, more targets, and a couple most likelies. You try to make that balanced list. But the most important thing is finding those are matches, but the most important thing is to find the right fit for your student. Your student is going to be spending 4 years at this place. It's a very pivotal time in their life, and we want to make sure it's a place that they want to be and that it fits who they are and they can make the most of the experience. And so that's really what I like to focus on the most, is what's the right fit? We can find matches, but what's the right fit?
I'm also seeing kids just throw schools onto their safety list, like, oh, I guess I'll apply there. And I know you don't recommend that. Tell us a little bit about that part of the list.
I do not. One of my big mantras is we are not going to have a school on that list that you will not be okay attending at. It's a waste of your time and your money and everything else to apply to a school that you have absolutely no interest in attending.
That's such a good point. What is a common mistake you see with kids that come to you that already have a developed list or that want to develop a list with you?
I mean, it really runs the gamut. There are students who have really done their homework and done their research, and their lists are somewhat balanced. Those are more unusual to see. I usually see students have a bunch of reaches, and then we have to kind of manage expectations and get a more balanced list. So I think that's probably the most common thing I see is maybe a little more heavy on the reaches.
About how many schools should be on a student's list? How many should they ultimately apply to?
So, I mean, I think it's really important that it's a lot of work to apply to a school. And so I want students to really give their all into each school that they apply to. A lot of them require, supplemental essays or additional materials. So I would say 7 is a good range, and I would go no more than 12.
Thank you for that. That's a great framework. So, Kristin, what is, I know you love this question. What do I want in a college experience? Why is that important for kids, and why is their answer helpful in thinking about college?
I mean, that's exactly that is, I should have $1 for every time I say that, because truly, I always say, when I first meet with a student is, what do you envision college for you? How do you envision spending your free time? How do you envision spending your weekends? What do you want out of a college experience? And that's where we try to delve and find the fit for a student, which I talked about earlier.
Do you ever find that parents will chime in and give their own explanation and it's different from their kids?
Sometimes, I mean, and then we always have to remember that we've all already had our college experiences, some of, most of us. And so this is now their time. But I think nowadays, most parents know that the students should be driving the train. We're here to support them in the process. So it's rare that I see a lot of the more parents' involvement than should be.
Kristin, we already talked about this in terms of target reach and most likely schools. Can you talk a little bit more about how a junior can start their list? Like what is the very first step they might want to consider? Or if a senior doesn't have a list yet, how do they get engaged in the process?
Sure. And I think for juniors, you obviously have the luxury of time and research. I think we're very, very fortunate nowadays that the internet is an amazing resource out there. I think also with the pandemic, colleges got very smart very quickly, and their websites are now more robust and provide virtual tours. They provide a lot of information about their schools. And so you can literally just be sitting at your desk and start learning about schools. I think asking yourselves some of those questions. I have a questionnaire that I do with students, what type of climate do you want? How far do you want to be from home? All those kinds of questions, answering those for yourself. Then you can kind of hone in on schools that fit that criteria. Then you can also look at your grades and and your GPAs and that stuff. But I really think finding that right fit is important. And so for seniors, that's something you can start now. The fall is a fantastic time. Nowadays, there's going to be college fairs coming up. There'll be schools coming to your high school, doing informational sessions. I highly recommend any school that a student thinks they may be interested in, that they attend that information session. That is probably the person who's giving that presentation is the person who's going to be reviewing your application. So it's nice to go up, introduce yourself, ask a question, send a thank you note. It's a way to show interest in the school that will go in your file. So there's a lot of resources out there for exploration. There's all kinds of, I give a bunch of websites to students that they can look and see students already at the universities. They do blogs, they do a day in a life at my school. I mean, you take those with a little grain of salt, but they do give you insight and give you an idea of the vibe of the school.
You mentioned following up with the person at the college fair, that the representative there, who is most likely the person who's going to review your application, that's part of demonstrated interest. What are some factors that go into demonstrated interest, and why is this important to colleges these days?
Sure. So, I mean, some schools don't, demonstrated interest doesn't play a factor, but for other schools, it does play quite a large factor. And so, as I said, I would go to the fairs, go to the information sessions, go online and register on the website to join the email. Both juniors and seniors, everybody can do that right now. It's also a way to just learn about the school. So that's important. Also, certain schools have interviews, that optional interviews or mandatory interviews. You can meet with a local alum. You can meet with a current student, either in your community or at the school. Those are really important experiences. Right now I'm prepping a number of students for the interviews that they're having at various and different schools.
So we've talked a lot about what goes into an application. How do you get kids to actually bring it all together and complete those applications right now, especially for seniors?
Yeah, well, this is a really pivotal week because August 1st, the Common App, which I know everybody hears a lot about, went live. So what that means is that you are now can apply to schools if you want to, if you're already got all your stuff done and you can turn it in and get going. But what I do recommend for seniors now, if they haven't done already, is to go online and make an account. There's a guide on the website of the Common App that you can review. Will kind of walk you through the process. It's really important to keep track of deadlines. When applications are due, schools vary. It's also going to depend on what type of admissions criteria you're applying for. And for juniors, I know it's early, but you too can go on and make an account. You won't be applying to schools, but you can look at the guide, have your account. It's never too early to do that.
Part of the Common App is the essays, and there's one Common App essay, but then colleges have their own supplemental essays. Tell us a little bit about how important the essays and what can kids expect in terms of the time they're going to spend crafting those essays.
Sure. I think that's the dreaded 5-letter word essay. Kids don't like to hear that, but it is important. It's an important part of the human insight component. It is the student's opportunity to bring them to life and off the page. And I think students sometimes feel, well, I've got to write about, they think they have to write about something serious. And I had a student who he's really into robotics, and he's like, well, I guess I should write about, and he was super not enthusiastic. I guess I should write about my robotics competition and how we didn't do really well in the first competition, but we did really well in the second. And I can talk about perseverance. And I said, oh, you don't sound like you want to write that essay. And he's like, well, I probably should. And I'm like, well, let's talk about what you like to do in your free time. And after a long kind of exploration process, he loves to play Sudoku. And so his essay is going to be about playing Sudoku and how playing Sudoku segues into his love of mathematics and physics. So essays really can show an important insight into a student. And so we walk students through the process. We start with brainstorming. I go through an outline of how a compelling essay should look. And then going back to your question about supplementals, some schools don't have supplementals, but a lot of schools do. And supplementals can range anything from, talk about a book or talk about how you would fit in the ecosystem of our school. Or one of them that's quite popular is, why do you want to go to XYZ school? And so there's strategies for how you should answer those. And also, I think kids it's daunting to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to write 10 supplementals or 20 supplementals. You really will only have to write a few on topics. And then I work with students to craft that essay to fit that question. So you're not actually having to sit down and write 20 supplementals.
The kids are relieved to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the timeline, Kristin. You mentioned earlier early decision, early action, and regular decision.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different ways kids can apply, and what are those typical deadlines?
Sure. So early decision is when, if your student has a school that, that's where I want to be, this is my dream school, I want to go there above all other schools, then it's an option to consider applying early decision. Early decision is a binding agreement between the student, the parent, and the guidance counselor. If you get into that school, you have to attend that school. Everybody signs a contract. Those are due, most all are due around November 1st. So, you want to get going on those. Early action, not all schools have early action. Not all schools have early decision either. Early action is where you can apply earlier to a school, and November 1st deadline is pretty much the norm, and you find out sometime in January. So you find out a little earlier. Regular decision is just basically what all the rest of us did when we went to college, which is usually due the beginning of January. There's also something out there that's called restrictive early action. And that is for the Ivies use that, and some other highly competitive schools. And that is kind of a hybrid between early decision and early action. Those schools don't offer early decision, but you're allowed to apply to that school and no other private institution. You can apply to a public institution, but you can't apply to another private institution. And then if you get in, you're not bound to go. So it's kind of a hybrid between early action and early decision. And then there are schools that have something called rolling admissions, which they have a time frame where you can apply anytime in that time frame. And they usually review applications quite quickly, within a few weeks, and you find out your decision.
That's really helpful, Kristin. Thanks for that. Along those lines with the application, there's financial aid to consider. Tell us a little bit about those deadlines and the processes that parents have to consider when applying for financial aid.
Sure. And so this is for seniors. I mean, juniors, this is a great time to also start thinking about financial aid. There are a lot of scholarships and grants and all different kinds of opportunities out there that students can seek. It takes some research, but it's never too early to start doing that. If your student is considering financial aid, the FAFSA, which is the federal student form, it opens on October 1st. So the sooner it opens, then the sooner you fill it out. Some schools, it's better because some schools are distributing their funds. So if you apply between October 1st and December 31st, you may have a better chance of getting funds than if you apply after that. And then the other thing to consider, and this is where it's really, really important to look at each school that you're applying to look at their financial aid, their procedures and their protocols, because there's something called the College Board's CSS profile. About 400 schools use that. And they also ask that you fill that out. And that affords you the ability to get additional money that's not federal money. Sometimes it's school specific. So it's never too early to start looking into financial aid. College is a huge investment. And so, but that October 1st date is really the one to keep in your top of your mind.
Kristin, a question that parents have asked before is whether colleges consider financial aid in their decisions. If a student is applying and not asking for aid versus one who is that ever considered?
Sure. Again, Ann, this is a situation where you really have to research the school you're applying to. There are schools that are need blind. UVA is one of them. That means even if you check the box on the Common App saying that I'm going to be applying financial aid, it's not something that's even looked at or considered. There are schools that are need aware, and those schools will take into consideration if you're applying for financial aid. So that's something to really look at the school you're applying to.
Thanks, Kristin. So let's wrap up before we go to Q&A. And by the way, if you have a question, please throw it in the chat and we'll get to those in just a second. Kristin, I know you're a strong believer that there's a college for everyone.
I really am. Again, one of my mantras besides, what do you want from a college experience is that there is a college for absolutely everyone. College does not define whether you're going to be successful in life, whether you're going to be happy in life. And there is truly, with 4,000 colleges out there, there is a college for everyone. So I try to impress that upon parents and students to try to alleviate some of the stress. That it also is, it's the college experience is what this child makes of it as well. Wherever they go, if they're engaged, if both in and out of the classroom, they can craft their experience however they want. So truly try to remember that when you're going through the process. I know sometimes it's hard, but there really is a school for everyone.
That's good advice, Kristin. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, we can help. As I mentioned earlier, we have specific programs for kids starting as early as rising 9th and 10th graders, rising 11th graders. And then we have a program called the Senior Express. And this is specifically just for seniors. It's a condensed version of our junior program to get kids finished with their applications, to finalize their list, to get all their essays done, to help them craft that narrative and get everything turned in on the deadlines that they want to get everything done by. So that's our Senior Express, and you can find more on our website at ectutoring.com/college-counseling. And again, this QR code will take you right there. As I mentioned before, Erin Ebert, she has been with us for 12 years, so she's very well versed in her craft, can also help you, and she's happy to schedule a call with you, and you can set up a 20-minute consultation with her. Either through our website, you can book it, or you can call our number at 703-934-8282. So Kristin, you have been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love hearing your insight. Not only have you counseled lots of kids, but you've been on the other side of the table, reviewing thousands of applications and making determinations into which students get in and which don't. So thank you for that. And before we wrap up and go to Q&A, I want to let you know that we have some upcoming webinars on August 18th, Executive Function and ADHD Crash Course, Organization and Study Skills for Elementary and Middle School Students. And then we have the same topic on October 30th, but for high school students. And September 14th, it's all about testing, SAT, ACT, or skip it, the role of college entrance exams at test optional schools. So if some of you have asked in the beginning, will this be recorded? And yes, it's been recorded and we'll send it out to you tomorrow. So we're going to go to Q&A right now. And after we go to Q&A, you will see a survey pop up on your screen. And if you would be so kind to take that survey before you leave this evening, I would very much appreciate it. All right, so let's go to our chat and take a look what everybody is asking about. Let's see. Oh, Winthrop asked, when you say program, Kristin, that is most important, what do you mean? I think what he's asking is, your course selection.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's important for students to show that they've challenged themselves, that they've taken rigorous courses. Now, obviously, taking the most rigorous courses that your school allows. Some schools don't have APs, they don't have IBs, they don't have DEs. So obviously you're never going to be penalized if you're not taking a course that your school doesn't offer. But if your school offers IBs, ABs, DEs, taking some of those classes, showing that you've challenged yourself, that you've taken initiative, and also taking those courses in the areas that interest you. And don't overlook electives, because electives are really important. They may not be they're not your core subjects that schools look at, but they show your areas of interest. So take that into account. So yeah, you're right, Ann. When I say program, I mean course selection.
Kristin, Byron is asking, considering a student athlete, how does the coach recruitment and student admission process interface? How strong is the relationship between the two activities? And I know you were a Division I athlete, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
So recruited athletes are a different beast, and we could just have a whole hour webinar on being a recruited athlete, because it depends on the sport that you play and it depends on the division that you're going for. There are the NCAA is highly regulated for specific sports and for whether you're going D1, D2, or D3. So it's important to go on the NCAA website and look at that, because there are dates that coaches cannot reach out to students until students can always reach out to coaches. But there's, certain times when they can have a visit, when they can make a phone call. It can get really highly detailed depending on the sport. But my own philosophy is, if your child is interested in playing a sport in college, reach out to the coach. Absolutely reach out to the coach, because it also goes to that fit component I'm talking about. Whether I was a swimmer, whether you swim at this school versus that school, it can be an incredibly different program. Schools have different cultures. There's different time requirements into the practices and what's required of the student. And so you really want that program to fit your child's expectations and how much they want to put into that sport. So it's a two-way thing. It's, you want to really feel that the college and that team is something that you vibe with. So I recommend to that parent that they go to the NCAA website, because there's a lot of guidelines involved.
Kristin, Suzanne says that some schools are limiting the number of recommendations or even specifying which type of teachers they want to hear from.
Sure.
How do you submit a recommendation from, say, an internship? So
on the Common App, they have the teacher recommendations, and then they have other recommendation, and that's where you would submit a personal rec of some sort. There are schools that are not having recommendations. I think Virginia Tech is not having recommendations this year. So it's, given the opportunity, definitely do it to the schools you're applying to, and it definitely can enhance your application. But obviously, if they don't accept them, you're not penalized for not submitting them. Millie asks, how do you handle a student who wants to go into medicine? What courses and tests are important? So if a student wants to go into medicine, I definitely would want to see biology, chemistry. I would want to see them having a in-depth program in the sciences and in the maths. I would like to see that they're doing something outside of the classroom that interests them in medicine. Maybe they shadow a doctor, maybe they take a course. There are a ton of pre-med programs at colleges in the summer that students can apply to. There's a lot out there, and the internet is your friend, so you can definitely go out and do some exploration. Kathy says, Kathy asks, if a student has struggled with grades, can high test scores help to overcome that? I mean, high test scores can definitely help, but it's important that if there's a reason behind those grades, that the student articulates that in the additional information section of the Common App. And if it's something like a significant challenge of some sort, or if they have a learning disability. The guidance counselor or a teacher can highlight that in their recommendations.
Brent asks, can you talk a little bit more about GPAs? Some colleges weigh AP classes, some don't. How does a college compare students' GPAs if they're calculated differently in different high schools?
So you're compared against the students at your high school. You're not going to be compared against, a student who's at a school, a high school in Charlottesville is going to be different than a student that's at a public school in Charlottesville is going to be different than a private school in Northern Virginia. So they're not comparing students from the different environments. You're comparing students in the environment that they are in.
Kelly says, can you talk a little bit about those well-rounded kids who have lots of activities and really great grades, but they don't know what they want to do, and their parent is fine with that? She says, this whole idea of passions and narratives, there really is no room for well-rounded kids who work hard and do lots of things but aren't savants and Lego masters.
Oh, so I'm learning to regret my Lego example. I guess what I'm saying is that if a student is well-rounded and they've done lots of different things, I mean, that's great. They can pick a couple of those things to highlight. It's really just finding that they're interested in something. I never expect 17 and 18-year-olds to know what they want to do in life. There are lots of adults who don't know what they want to do in life, but there are things that all people are interested in, whatever that is, whatever they find enjoyable or have a passion for, and they've taken classes in it, or they've done activities outside of school. So that's what you need to elevate and highlight in the application.
Thank you, Kristin. Holly says, if a student has a unique background that's influenced their worldview, such as living and attending primary middle school overseas, do you recommend featuring that in the essay, or is there another way to highlight that on the application?
Yeah, I totally, if it has been, and I'm sure it has been, a formative experience for that student, then they should absolutely talk about it in their essays. And then in their activity section, if they've done neat things while they were abroad, even if it's outside of high school, but it's something super unusual, that, like, let's say they hiked Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, I would put that in. If you were in 8th grade, I would still put that in. So I think if you have an international abroad experience, definitely talk about it in your essays.
David asks, do financial aid awards come with the admissions decision?
No, not normally. A lot of schools, they don't even come until later in the spring. It just also depends on the school, and it depends on the type of financial aid you're applying for. So I highly recommend you do your research.
It kind of begs the question about early decision. You're applying to one school early decision, and at that point, you don't know what your financial aid package is going to be like. Are you bound to that school, even if maybe the aid package isn't what you get later, isn't the aid package you need?
Right, that's a really great question, and that is the one thing that you can get out of an early decision contract for is financial reasons.
Gina said, can you repeat the name of the school-specific aid?
So that's the CSS profile. So on the schools that you're applying to, your student is applying to, go onto the financial aid website portion of the website, and they'll talk about whether they require the CSS profile.
How much should college ranking be considered when making a decision? I know what you're going to say.
I mean, it goes to what we've been talking about all tonight. I am far more interested in finding a school that fits the child than where it ranks on some US News World Report. And if you look at all the different rankings, they're all different too. A school that's number 1 on one ranking is number 10 on another. So, I mean, to get obsessed with rankings, I know it's hard not to, but I really discourage doing that.
Do colleges consider rigor impacted by extracurricular? I mean, my kid is in the marching band, and because of that, he cannot take rigorous classes and get the music class, which makes his GPA go down.
No, I appreciate that. I know music is one area where, kids are in multiple different jazz band and marching band, and those take up some of those elective times, but the core classes are still there. So for core classes, truly, I would take the most rigorous that you can, in which your student feels comfortable taking.
Ian asks, if you want to apply to a highly ranked school that is test optional for SAT and ACT, would it be best to still send scores out, even if they didn't really do well, or is it up to the student's choice? I know you answered this before, but it's an important question. Can you reiterate that, Kristin?
Sure. I think look and see. Every school publishes, the scores and the percentages of the students in the score ranges that they have. If your student isn't in the top ranges of those scores that have admitted students, do not submit them. I have many, many times where I've been reviewing students in this test optional world, and the student submitted a score that was not a competitive score, but I had to consider it because they submitted it. So if you're not in those top ranges, don't submit. And then I think some people think, well, if I don't submit it, the student doesn't submit it, then they're trying to hide something. And that's not the case. If the score is not submitted, it's not even considered factored in, and the evaluator doesn't think about it. And then also with regards to AP scores, I think sometimes people feel, well, if you don't submit the AP score, then you're trying to hide something. I think the pandemic changed that landscape because there are a lot of reasons why kids aren't taking AP scores anymore. And I think it kind of devalued that to some degree. So if your student didn't do well on an AP score, don't submit it. The grade they got in that class is far more important than the score they got on that AP exam.
Two parents asked about applying to theater programs and applying to arts programs. How is that different than a traditional application?
Absolutely. If your student is, if they plan on majoring in drama or majoring in music or dance, and that's really important to them, definitely submit an arts portfolio. In the Common App, there's the area where you can submit a portfolio. I would recommend reaching out to the department chair in the area that your student is interested in, almost like a sport. Students in band and in music and in dance and other areas of creativity, they spend as much time as athletes do. And so I treat them the same as I do an athlete.
Kristin, Joyce asks, should you disclose, or should the student disclose if he or she has a learning disability or say ADHD?
I think if it's played a important factor in the students in their the course selection they've picked, in the challenges that they've faced and their experience in high school, I would absolutely talk about it.
Going back to the question about the arts program, Megan wants to know, when should a portfolio be submitted?
So a lot of times students, they'll submit their Common App and then the portfolio will come after. I just would make sure that the portfolio is there by the deadline of the application.
Jennifer asked, some schools require the student to apply to a school within the college, such as a business or engineering school. How does that work in the application process?
So there are certain schools like UVA, for example. If you want to go into engineering, you need to apply to you don't apply to the College of Arts and Sciences, you apply directly to the engineering program and you go in as a freshman. For business, there are schools that are direct admit business schools where their undergraduate programs, you apply directly to their business school. There are other schools where you apply to the business school after your sophomore year at the school. So it just varies. But it's when you apply to, like at UVA, to the engineering school, it's very difficult. If you want to go into engineering and you've applied to the College of Arts and Science, it's very difficult to transfer into the engineering school. So again, as I've said numerous times tonight, research is really important. So those schools that you're applying to, look and see how that school handles, whether you have the ability and flexibility to switch between schools within the university.
One parent asked, and I'll just take this question and then the next one. And I'm sorry if I don't get to everybody's questions, but please feel free to email us and we'll get back to you. If the student wants to apply to mechanical engineering, what can that student be doing outside of school that will help him?
Well, I think for engineering in general, there are lots of opportunities to get involved in clubs, in robotics, take summer enrichment programs. Again, course selection is really, really important if you want to go into engineering. And then you can also talk about it. You can talk about, how you got involved, how you got interested in engineering and mechanical engineering.
Last question from Justin. To what extent do first quarter grades get factored in for seniors as part of their application?
So it depends on if you're applying early decision, the schools aren't going to have your grades. If you're applying early action, the grades will also not be in by the time decisions are made. Usually, if you're applying regular decision, then those mid-year grades, they definitely want them. Even if you're applying early action, you have to submit your mid-year grades. It's one of the requirements, and schools do look at them. So it just also depends on the school. But first semester senior grades, I think people forget that they are important. And if your student hasn't done super well or as well as they'd like to their junior year, this is a wonderful opportunity to have an upward trajectory, and that can be super compelling.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you so much for being part of our webinar tonight. And parents, thank you for attending. Please hold on for a second. As you exit, a survey will pop up. And if you would be so kind as to take that for us, that would be wonderful. Hope to see you at the next webinar. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you again. And thank you again, Kristin, for your expertise. Bye, everybody.